We have rules. You left your shift. You're terminated. The manager coldly stated as she walked in, still with blood on her sleeve from just saving someone from an accident. She nodded without tears, without excuses. But the next morning, the entire neighborhood shook as two military helicopters landed in the middle of the street. No one understood what was happening until a general stepped out, calling her by name. Type justice if you believe people who sacrifice for others shouldn't be punished, but honored. Talia Monroe, 28, was a server at a 24-hour diner on a small corner in Raleigh, North Carolina. Working nights for 5 years, never late, never taking sick days. One Friday night, around 2:30 a.m., while wiping down the counter, she heard a loud crash outside. An SUV had hit a light pole. A man fell onto the road, blood pouring from his abdomen. No one stopped to help. Talia ran out, removed her apron, used a cloth towel to apply pressure to the wound, called 911, and held the victim's hand tightly. He mumbled, "Don't let me fall asleep. I was a soldier. I need to get back to my daughter." When the ambulance arrived, she returned to the diner, soaked in blood, shaken, 22 minutes late. The manager was waiting. "You abandoned your post." "No notification. This is a serious violation." "I was saving someone." "Doesn't matter. This is a business, not a charity." She was fired on the spot, not allowed to clean out her locker, not paid for her remaining hours. Talia left quietly, clutching her bloodied apron and carrying an invisible ache. She told no one, didn't post online, didn't complain. The night had already been busy at Pete's All-Night Diner, a small establishment that served everything from pancakes to burgers around the clock. Talia had been on her feet for nearly 7 hours straight when she heard the crash. The sound was unmistakable. Metal crumpling, glass shattering, followed by a horrifying silence. Through the large front windows, she saw the SUV's headlights pointing at an odd angle, illuminating the falling rain. Without a second thought, she dropped the cloth she'd been using to wipe tables and rushed outside. The other customers, a handful of night shift workers and late-night college students, barely looked up from their meals. The man was lying half in the street, half on the sidewalk. His breathing was labored, and a dark stain was spreading across his shirt. No one had stopped to help, not the taxi that slowed before speeding away, not the couple who crossed to the other side of the street. Talia's first aid training from a community college course kicked in. "Sir, can you hear me? I'm going to help you. Stay with me." She pressed firmly on the wound, remembering the instructor's words. "Pressure stops bleeding. Don't let up until help arrives." The man's eyes fluttered. His skin was ashen, lips turning bluish. "Cold," he whispered. "Help is coming," she assured him, though her arms were already tiring from maintaining pressure. "Tell me about your daughter." "Sophia," he managed. 7, smart, so smart. She kept him talking, even as rain soaked through her uniform and his blood warmed her increasingly numb fingers. When the ambulance finally arrived, the paramedics had to gently pry her hands away. She had been pressing so long her muscles had locked. "You probably saved his life," one paramedic told her. Back at the diner, she expected understanding. Perhaps not praise, but at least acknowledgement that some situations transcend workplace rules. Instead, manager Dave Porter stood by the register, arms crossed, face set in rigid disapproval. Other employees averted their eyes. The late-night customers watched uncomfortably as Dave delivered his verdict. "You know the policy. No one leaves the floor without manager approval, especially not during the night shift when we're already short-staffed." "A man was dying," Talia said, her voice surprisingly steady despite her trembling hands. "Not our problem," Dave replied. "This is a business. We serve food. We're not running an emergency room." Her 5 years of perfect attendance, of covering shifts when others called in sick, of staying late without complaint, none of it mattered now. Just like that, she was unemployed. As she walked home through the pre-dawn darkness, Talia wondered if she'd made the right choice. Then she remembered the man's whispered words about his daughter and knew she would do the same thing again. That man was Major Joseph Joe Franklin, a special training officer at Fort Bragg, who had just finished a night shift and was heading home. The accident caused severe blood loss. Had help been delayed by just 3 minutes, he wouldn't have survived. The hospital record noted, An unidentified woman maintained pressure on the wound for nearly 11 continuous minutes, saving the patient's life. Joe woke up after surgery. His first words, "Where is she?" The nurses didn't know. They only knew she worked as a server and was fired immediately afterward. Joe sent a report to his unit, requesting a civilian investigation. "Someone who didn't know me still risked herself to save me. I can't let her disappear as if she never existed." Fort Bragg created a file identifying Talia. They sent the file to command. The response from the superiors, "Acknowledged properly, no media, no PR, action." A plan was devised. At exactly 6 a.m. on Sunday, 2 Black Hawk helicopters would perform a silent drop in Talia's residential area, without prior explanation. Meanwhile, Talia sat in her small apartment, having told her mother nothing except, "I quit my job." In the 2 days since losing her job, Talia had applied to 7 other diners and restaurants. No one was hiring, at least not for her preferred overnight shifts. With rent due in 10 days and only $247 in her checking account, anxiety had begun to overshadow any sense of having done the right thing. Her roommate, Erin, a nursing student, had offered to cover her portion of rent this month, but Talia refused. "I'll figure something out," she insisted, though her options were quickly dwindling. Saturday night, she sat at their small kitchen table, circling more job listings in the newspaper. Erin was pulling a night shift at the university hospital, ironically at the same emergency department where Major Franklin had been treated, though neither woman knew this connection. Talia finally fell asleep around midnight, the newspaper still open beside her, alarm set for 7 a.m. to continue her job search. Her dreams were troubled, filled with images of blood and disapproving faces. At Fort Bragg, preparations were underway for the morning operation. Major Franklin, still recovering and against medical advice, insisted on being present. "She didn't hesitate when I needed help," he told his commanding officer. "I'm not going to sit this out." 2 Black Hawk helicopters were prepped for the mission, designated as a civilian recognition operation in the official logs. The pilots were briefed, the landing zone coordinates programmed, and a small detachment of soldiers prepared to provide ground security. Captain Williams, in charge of the operation, reviewed the unusual orders with his team. "We're recognizing a civilian who saved Major Franklin's life. This isn't standard protocol, but it comes directly from General Harrington." Meanwhile, Joe Franklin reviewed Talia's file. The military had been thorough in their background check. 28 years old. Community college education. Supporting her mother through several health crises. Perfect employee record until her termination. No criminal history. Multiple community service entries, including volunteer work at a homeless shelter every Thanksgiving. "She's exactly the kind of person who would stop to help a stranger," Joe thought. By 4 a.m., the operation was in motion. Medical staff had reluctantly cleared Major Franklin for the brief mission, though he would be monitored throughout. "She didn't have to stop," Joe told the medical officer, securing him into the helicopter. "Most people don't, you know. They're afraid, or they think someone else will handle it, or they just don't want to get involved. But she did." As dawn approached, the Blackhawks lifted off from Fort Bragg, heading toward the small apartment complex in eastern Raleigh, where a woman who had saved a stranger's life now slept, unaware that her act of kindness had set extraordinary events in motion. This isn't a reward. This is a reminder that the world still sees and will stand up for those who have stood up for others. Type honor if you believe kindness deserves to echo, even in silence. At 5:57 a.m., the quiet neighborhood was suddenly filled with the sound of helicopter rotors vibrating window panes. Talia jumped up, pulled the curtains. 2 Blackhawks from Fort Bragg were landing in the middle of the street, soldiers forming a security perimeter. The entire neighborhood poured out to see. No one understood what was happening. A line of soldiers disembarked, led by Major Franklin, walking directly to apartment 3B, knocking just once. When Talia opened the door, Major Franklin saluted formally, then said, "You saved me. Now we've come to thank you." He handed her a handwritten letter from the command general. "You did what the military motto always reminds us. Leave no one behind. No cameras, no press." But 12 soldiers stood at attention as she stepped onto her balcony, eyes brimming with tears. The neighborhood stood still. No one joked. A little boy asked, "Is she a general, Mom?" An elderly resident whispered, No, she's the reason we still believe in people. The helicopters departed after 9 minutes. But in the hearts of hundreds of witnesses, those 9 minutes would never be forgotten. On her apartment railing, a small flag was left behind. Not the national flag, but a medical corps banner with handwritten words. Saved one. Seen by many. The sudden roar of rotors pulled every resident from sleep. Confused faces appeared in windows. Parents clutched children. Some initially feared some disaster or emergency had struck their quiet community. The precision of the landing was remarkable. The lead Black Hawk touching down in the center of Maple Street, the second taking position at the intersection. Immediately, soldiers deployed with practiced efficiency, establishing a perimeter that was neither threatening nor casual. Talia, still in her pajamas, stood frozen at her window. This couldn't possibly be related to her, yet something in her gut told her it was. Her downstairs neighbor, Mrs. Castillo, called up to her window. "Talia, are the soldiers looking for you? What's happening?" Before she could answer, she saw him, the man from the accident. No longer pale and bleeding, but walking with slight assistance, his uniform crisp despite the early hour. Behind him walked another officer, wearing the insignia of a colonel. She had just enough time to pull on a sweater over her pajamas before the knock came. Opening the door, she found herself face to face with the man whose life she had saved. The recognition was mutual and immediate. "You're alive," she whispered. "Thanks to you," Major Franklin replied, his voice strong, despite his recent injury. The colonel stepped forward. "Ms. Monroe, I'm Colonel Garrett. On behalf of the United States Army, I want to personally convey our gratitude for your actions." Talia struggled to find words. "Anyone would have done the same." "But they didn't," Major Franklin said. "You did." The handwritten letter he presented was on official letterhead, signed by General Harrington himself. The words blurred through her tears as she tried to read it. The colonel explained, "We don't typically do this, but Major Franklin is not only a valued officer, he's the lead instructor for our combat medic program. The skills you demonstrated, the immediate action, without hesitation, these are exactly what he teaches." Neighbors had gathered in small clusters, watching in amazement. A local news crew arrived but was politely but firmly kept at the perimeter. This wasn't for publicity. When Talia stepped onto her small balcony, overwhelmed by the moment, the soldiers below moved in perfect unison, rendering a formal salute. In military tradition, the gesture was clear, the highest respect one could offer. Mrs. Castillo, who had lost her own son in Afghanistan years earlier, wept openly. "That's a hero's welcome," she explained to confused onlookers. The small medical flag left behind wasn't merely symbolic. It represented the Combat Medical Badge, one of the most respected insignias in the military, usually reserved for those who provide medical care under enemy fire. As the helicopters lifted off, their downdraft stirring leaves and paper in small whirlwinds, Talia remained on her balcony, the letter clutched to her chest. For a moment, the world had acknowledged what should never need acknowledgement, that compassion matters, that strangers are worth saving, that rules should never supersede humanity. The noise faded, but the impact remained. A week later, Talia received an official letter from the Department of Defense, inviting her to become an honorary advisor for the Emergency Medical Response Training Program at Fort Bragg. She had no medical degree, no professional experience, but she had the instincts of someone who didn't hesitate. She accepted. Not to make a big deal of it, but to tell trainees, the right response at the right time needs no medals. Just heart. The restaurant where she'd been fired closed after the incident went viral. Not because she had shared it, but because street cameras recorded it and a regular customer spread the story. When asked at her first meeting with young soldiers, "Where did you learn to act like that?" she replied, "I didn't learn. I just remembered that when you can save someone, you should do it right away." The transformation in Talia's life was swift but meaningful. The honorary advisor position came with a stipend. Not enough to live on, but enough to supplement the job she found at the Veterans Affairs Hospital cafeteria, where her story had preceded her. The diner's closure hadn't been her intention. After the story spread, customers simply stopped coming. The owner, facing mounting pressure, issued a public apology that Talia graciously accepted. "Everyone deserves a second chance," she told reporters when they finally caught up with her. Once a month, she now speaks to medical corpsmen in training. She sits at the edge of the stage, uncomfortable with being the center of attention, but determined to share her message. "I'm not special," she always begins. "I didn't have special training or equipment. I just decided that his life mattered more than my job at that moment." The soldiers listen intently to someone who exemplifies what they're training to be. Major Franklin recovered fully and continues teaching. He and Talia have developed an unlikely friendship, occasionally meeting for coffee. His daughter Sophia drew Talia a picture that hangs framed in her new apartment, a crude but heartfelt drawing of two figures holding hands, with the words, "Thank you for saving my daddy," carefully printed below. Some people aren't born to be heroes, but they choose the right moment to stand up, and the world should stand with them. Subscribe to TT Hero Stories if you believe kindness needs no permission, but needs to spread. TT Hero Stories, because some heroes never stop serving.